Hi, and welcome to the Marquee Overview on the Marquee Demystified DVD. I'm going to walk you through the next 25 minutes as an overview of power just beneath the surface of the Marquee Title tool. So we're going to start first by going under Tools and choosing Title Tool. Now you should get a window like this. If you've never used Marquee before, then it will come up and they will both be available choices. So if you want to use Marquee most of the time, you probably want to check the Persist button and then choose Marquee. And now it will default to opening Marquee every time, and you can skip that dialog box. But if you want to change your mind later on, let's close Marquee, and we'll look at where that setting is. It's under Settings, and it's called Marquee Title. Double-click on that. And here we have Create New Title using Marquee Title tool, or the default behavior, which we just saw, which is Ask Me. So if you don't want to be asked, stick to one or the other. And you have a choice here for Promote Title Tools titles to Marquee. So if you have older titles and you want to open them up, you may not want to promote them to Marquee because for some reason they're simple, you don't want to mess with them, you may want to go back to an older system that doesn't have Marquee, in which case you might want to decide on a case-by-case basis, or you might decide, no, never change anything to Marquee, or you might say, well, I've got this wonderful title tool, I might as well add some value to the titles even if it's just a small thing, and I will always promote my title tool titles to Marquee when they come over to my system and I open them up for editing. Now, if you're just a little paranoid like I am, you might want to back up the title on Promote. That means that when you promote the title to Marquee, it will create a backed up version in your bin. That will be the original old title tool version, and it will go into your bin with the .tt on the end of the name of that title. So that's just one extra step to cover yourself. If you find that you have to go back to an older system that doesn't have Marquee, you can take those older titles and cut them into the sequence, again, by hand, unfortunately. It will take some time, but the only way to move titles backwards to an older system is by eliminating the Marquee titles and replacing them with the older ones. Okay. Hopefully you won't have to worry about that too much. Let's go open up Marquee again. Now, Marquee has several windows which will open up automatically. We have the main title window where we're going to do most of our work. We have the Quick Titles window and the Library window, which will have a series of materials, styles, textures, templates, including the artifactual templates that we've loaded earlier, and the scripts, the transform properties where we can be very precise about changing the position of our images by typing in numbers or by moving them using the value shuttles. I'll show you those in a minute, including rotation and anchor points. You can get pretty sophisticated with positioning and moving things using the Transform Properties window. Also, the Effect window, which is great for adding an extruded edge. The Layers window, which is very similar to the kind of layers that you may have seen in Adobe Photoshop or After Effects. It allows you to get to the multiple layers of a multi-layer composition without worrying about where you're actually clicking on the screen. So we'll show you that later as well. So let's start real basic. And we'll pick a font. Let's pick a nice font that we may have loaded in with our artifactual fonts like Blue Highway. And click on the T for text and start to type. Now you can see that there's a red box around this title, and when I click on the arrow, it allows me to move the text and the box. And when I resize this box, it allows me to continue to type without wrapping the text. And this is how it wraps depending on the size of that red box. And as I change the size of the box, I can change how it wraps so that I can really go to a vertical composition if I like, or make it all one big long line if I have enough room. Okay. And I can center this text in the box by clicking here. That doesn't center the box on the screen, but it does center it inside the box. Now, let's get rid of some of this. Go back to being simple by selecting the text and hitting the backspace key. Let's resize the box. Now, the other thing we can do with this box is to hold down the Alt, or on the Macintosh, the Option key. And when we hold down the Alt or Option key, when we pull that corner down, we're doing a very, very fast resize. And this is much quicker than guessing at a typeface size, and it allows us to very, very quickly position something exactly inside a composition. And if you hold down the Alt or Option key and the Shift key at the same time, you'll make sure that the aspect ratio doesn't change, because just the Alt or Option key alone will allow you to squish the title, and you may not want to do that. Most of the time, probably not. So by holding on the Alt or Option and the Shift at the same time, you can make sure that it stays in the same aspect ratio that you started with. So that's positioning and the text tool. Now, everything is affected by the Quick Titles pane, and we need to have the main surface enabled, which it is, and we can go in and quickly change colors. What's nice about this is that we see the color very, very quickly before we have to commit. We also have an opacity change here, and I'll show you how the value shuttles work. The value shuttles allow you to click with the mouse or pen, if you're working with that, and just drag. And you can see I'm changing the values, and they're changing on the screen at the same time, so I get a really good sense of what it's going to look like, again, before I release the mouse. To reset, I have a reset button here. It very quickly puts me back to 100% opacity. The other checkbox here enables lighting. So I need to have the object selected. That's pretty important. If I want to move the light, I'm going to click on the Light tool, and that will show me where the light is. And by moving it around, I can affect that title and give it a nice gradation as that light falls off. And by right mouse clicking or control clicking on the Mac, I continue to add lights. Of course, if I have too many lights, it's going to wash out my text, so I want to move them away. Perhaps let's delete a light, and we'll change the light type. So by right mouse clicking or control clicking on the Mac, we can say light type infinite, and that's going to light everything nice and evenly from an infinite distance away. Or spotlight, and spotlight allows me to light just a section of it. And if I was doing an animation, I could actually animate this light moving across my text. And that's also interesting for shapes, which we'll get into later. Let's go back to the standard light, which is the local light, which is an omnidirectional light. To turn that off, we need to select the text again and disable the lighting. Remember, the most important thing with lighting is to select the text first. Let's enable a gradient. Now, this is a local gradient, and you can see that it has a specific gradient for each letter. And that's what it means by local. And if we want something a little different, we can click on Mapping and choose Container. And that's pretty much what people want, I think, when they want a gradient on their text. And we have a lot of control over this gradient. If we go in and change the gradient color by right mouse clicking or control clicking on the color stop, we can choose a color gradient. Now that's going to mix with the base color unless we uncheck the tint button. And now when we do that, we have a pure gradient from red to white. So we're not affecting it with the base color at all. That's what the tint button does. And now we have a red to a blue gradation. And we can change that gradation by starting the red earlier or later. And by holding down the Alt or Option key on the Mac, we can add another color stop in the middle and put yet another color in the gradation. Let's put a nice bright yellow. And now we have a 3-color gradation, and we have lots of control over where that gradation starts. And just to spice it up a little bit, we can rotate that gradation. Now, of course, we have horizontal and circular gradations, but just a standard left to right gradation, we can rotate it to add things on an angle. So you can see here how that angle changes the look of the title. So it's pretty sophisticated stuff, pretty fast, just using this one little quick titles control. Now to turn off the gradient, you uncheck it. And let's move down to drop shadow. By checking the drop shadow, we start with a standard XY offset, an opacity of 50%, and a softness of 0. Now, this is important because the softness makes a big difference in the quality of the title, but it also makes a difference in how quickly Marquee title will update. So first we can move it around. And we can reset it by setting back to where we started. And let's add some softness again by holding down the mouse using the value shuttle. And you can see how quickly we get a beautiful, soft drop shadow. However, as I move this around the screen, it gets a little bit slower. So if you have a complicated composition, you might want to set the softness to 0 on all your drop shadows until you get the text in place. And then, once you like the positioning of everything, go in and, potentially using the layers control that I'll show you later, go to each object and add in some nice softness. Let's reset that and turn off the drop shadow and move down to the edge properties. And we start with a default edge, which is basically no edge. So in order to get an edge, we need to choose one here in the edge type. And that yellow is a little unfortunate, so let's pick another color and let's make the edge bigger. And you may want to mess around with lighting on the edge. You can see that that brings out the bevel. So if we go back and turn on lighting in Marquee, you can see very quickly how you get something that looks unusual, different, fresh. And if you want to see it without all those jaggy edges, if you want to see it anti-aliased, we'll go up under Render and say Preview, which is also Control / or Option / on the Mac. And it will quickly render one frame for us. It's a nice crisp edge, but not too crisp because that's what the anti-aliasing does. It blurs it just a little to make it look crisp from a distance. Okay, so let's select this. And here's a little trick. If you want to turn off the edge, it's not good enough just to uncheck it here. You see, I've just turned off the color of the edge, but I still have a beveled edge. And in order to go back to a 0 edge, I need to set it back to the default. And there we are with a flat edge. So remember, if it's looking a little strange and you can't quite figure out why, check the edge type to see if it's on default. And we still have some of the gradients that we looked at before. All right, let's turn off the edge properties and turn off the lighting. Let's go down to the library window. Here we have a bunch of pre-made styles. And if it has a blue dot, that means that it's animated. And if you double click, it will apply an animated style to the text. And that will take a long time to render. So in general, you may want to avoid the blue dots unless you're ready to spend some time rendering. So this is selected, and we'll double click on opposing gradients. And you can see it's just a cool little composition that somebody came up with gradation from black to gray or white, and then reversing on the text itself. So something that you could use quickly, or something that might give you an idea on how to use it later on. You can learn from these presets so that you can create stuff yourself. Let's undo that with Control Z or Command Z on the Mac. Materials. So here we have a bunch of, in many cases, complicated gradations or some interesting looks that have been pre-made. I'm undoing each one of these because after you apply it, it will just apply it on top of the old one, and the next time you apply something. So you want to apply and then just undo it before you look at the next one, and so on. Some of these are pretty simple. So let's go to textures. And we've got some wonderful artifactual textures that came with your artifactual DVD. We'll double click on one, and you can see that some of these are more appropriate to a background, but once we add a drop shadow and so forth, you can get some pretty cool looks with these as well. And add some tint to it too. Okay. So let's undo that. Take a couple steps back, undo, and go to templates. Now the templates are going to write over anything that you already have on the screen. So if I pick one of these templates, let's say this one, lower third, and you can see it replaced everything on the screen and everything is highlighted and ready to be changed, which is very convenient if you want to start changing colors or something else. If you want to just check off this, click off and click back on again, and you can make some very, very quick changes if there's something here that you'd like to see a little different from the default templates. And then you can just right mouse click or control click and save what you've done as a new template. It's very fast to modify all of the templates that have shipped with your system, and we go into more detail on that in the courseware. It's also on the DVD. So here you have 100 templates. Some of them are quite elaborate, and some are a little more simple. So let's undo, Control Z or Command Z, and a couple of steps back to where we were, and go to Scripts. As you may remember in the installation document, we talked about scripts. These are little macros that have been written in the Python programming language, and the artifactual scripts are going to allow you to move between 4:3 and 16:9 aspect ratio safe title areas. So in other words, if you are working with a text in 4:3 safe title and you change it to a 16:9, it will automatically move your title to the correct safe title area. So let's move on to the transform properties. This will allow me to move text that has been selected by using the value shuttle to be very, very precise, or to reset it back to 0. Again, I can position things exactly where I want them in the position, which is in the XYZ space, or Z space, or just in the scale, which is going to make things bigger or smaller and stretch them potentially. And again, based on numbers that you type in. We can go in and start doing rotation. And the other place that we can do rotation is up here by clicking on the rotation globe. And we have the ability to rotate by holding down the different colored lines with the mouse. You can see it updating here as I make some changes. So we have true 3D rotation. Move this down here, and just to show you a more sophisticated way to do some rotation is by moving the anchor point and where the center of the rotation is. And you can do that by putting the cursor where the blue lines intersect at the bottom or top of the edges of the globe and clicking and dragging. And that will change where the center of the rotation is. So the next time that you rotate, it's going to look slightly different. It might move like a barn door. It might look like a swing. And that's by moving the anchor point. Again, you can reset that anchor point by clicking down here on the reset buttons. So we can get some very sophisticated rotated images. And remember that when we're rotating in 3D space, that the lighting is also affected. So if I enable the lighting and I move the lights, say, to here, when I go in and I start to rotate this, you can see that the light actually does affect the object as it would in real life. And they have some nice realistic lighting effects here. Now, in terms of the layers, we actually have a lot of layers here, though you probably don't see them. They're inside the text box because each one of these titles has letters which can be manipulated separately with all of the controls that you've seen so far. So we can get very, very sophisticated very fast. Let's click undo on those. And we'll see what happens when we start drawing objects. So let's set our rotation back to 0. And let's draw an object using the box. So notice here that it inherited all of the properties of the text, and that is because the text was the last thing that was selected before I drew the shape. Let's undo that and make sure that I have deselected something. And now I'll draw the box again. And it goes back to a boring white. Well, let's start there, and we'll enable the lighting, and let's move it. Aha, we have a problem. We need to change the object order. So let's send it to the back. So it's selected, and go to Object, Select, Send it back, and now the marquee title is on front of the object. Now, we might have some problems actually selecting that background again. Let me see. If I click, what I'm selecting is the title. So rather than have to move the title off and then select the background, let's use our Layers window. So we'll go down to Layers, click on Shape, and let's add a drop shadow, for instance, and make that a big drop shadow so we'll see it's part of the shape. And now we'll click on the text box, and we'll do the same thing. We'll make it nice and soft. So you see very quickly I've been able to manipulate both the text and the object here without messing around by controlling them in the layers. Let's draw one more object very quickly. And again, because the last thing selected was the titles, I end up with the green. And let's put this between the text and between the text in the background. So I'm going to go down to the layers and drag this and actually reposition it here in the layers window. And then with it still selected, I'm going to pick another color. Something like that, and change the gradation. So very quickly we have a multi-layered composition, and we can continue to move things around the screen, and if it gets a little slow, we can go in and turn off the drop shadows, again by clicking on the shape, turn off the drop shadow. Or leave the drop shadow and turn it back to the hard-edged shadow, and do that for everything that's making the composition slow down. And now when I move things around, it'll go a lot faster. That's a quick overview of all of the windows. If you want to save this, you have a bunch of options. You can just save it, and it will save it as an MQP file. And you may want to do this if you're doing a complicated composition and you want to save multiple versions of it. You can just save this anywhere on your desktop and then call it up if you want to do versioning or go back to an earlier version. And the .mqp file is a native marquee format. Save as to make the multiple versions. Save to bin. And now we'll give it a title, and it will save it to the Avid bin. And we'll say OK. And it will render the one frame, which you see didn't take long at all. And it will ask me what bin it's going to go into and what's the resolution. I'll pick 3:1 and just say Save. And that will save it to the marquee bin. OK, let's start a new one. And just a quickly overview for rolls and crawls. So we're going to be typing in rolls and crawls. This is very different from an animation. And it is not a real-time crawl, but it is a fast render. So don't be afraid to use this instead of the crawl that was on the older title tool. And we'll save this. And it will go into our sequence. and then when we render it, it will be real time. So those are all the basics.